Welcome to the January edition of Takoma Coffee House, where in the next hour, we'll look at school boundary options in the Blair Cluster and hear about a movement to teach sexual preference tolerance at the elementary school level. Learn why Liz Lerman moved her renowned dance exchange to Takoma Park, and listen in on a Phil Wiggins blues harmonica session. Plus, poetry by Alona Popper, what Takoma is reading, and hear how to distinguish those post-holiday blahs from full-blown depression. Hi, and welcome to Coffee House Forum. Do you know where your middle school kids will be going to school next year? Or your elementary school kids in the fall of 1999? If you live in the Takoma Park, Silver Spring area, in the Blair Cluster, there's a good chance you don't. That's because the Blair Cluster is swelling due to the influx of 330 students from the former Prince George's County side of Takoma Park. To accommodate this growth, the old Blair High School on Wayne Avenue is being converted to a kindergarten through 5th grade elementary school and 6th through 8th grade middle school. But who will go to the converted Blair schools on Wayne, and who will stay where they're currently in school or be pushed to another school? With us to talk about the possible answers to these questions are Marilyn Shoenfeld, Blair Cluster Coordinator and the cluster's liaison to the Board of Education, and Joe Lavorgna, Director of the Montgomery County Schools Department of Planning and Capital Programming. Welcome to the Takoma Coffee House.
Thank you.
Why don't we start, Joe, by talking a little bit about what the schools identify as the criteria for saying where kids should be enrolled, where the boundaries should be drawn?
Well, they're drawn based on geographic areas, respectful of the population in those areas. They have been established over a long period of time, and as such, when changes come about, the criteria that we use to implement a change are in board policy. And they basically are the makeup of the student population, the proximity to the school, the diversity of the school, and the utilization of the school. Is it overcrowded? Is it underutilized? And among those various criteria, are there some that are more important than others? Well, certainly not having a school overutilized or underutilized is very important. And the board has a companion policy called the Quality Integrated Education Policy that looks at the diversity in the schools to try to maintain diversity. Marilyn, are these all the criteria that you're looking at?
Yes, we looked at those criteria first and then spent a lot of time developing our own. And each school sat down and looked at their population and looked at their borders and looked at maps and said, well, where do we want to be next year? What part of this process do we want to buy into? Not that they'll really have a lot of choice there, but we talked about transportation issues mainly, about keeping walkers within safe distances. We talked about protecting at-risk populations that go to certain schools in our cluster and to provide minimum disruption for them. We talked about maintaining and promoting diversity in the new school and in the other schools in the cluster, and seeing this as an opportunity to correct problems that have become, or issues that have come up over the last 15 or 20 years. Because it's been that long since we've had a boundary change. And our cluster is kind of strange because we have 10 schools that are paired, where the children will go to kindergarten through 2nd grade to one school, and then 3rd, 4th, and 5th to another school. So you have to look at the pairings as well as the individual school boundaries, and to make sure this all works out.
These other criteria that Marilyn mentioned, Joe, are they consistent with the criteria that the school system uses? Would they be subsumed by some of the criteria that you use? Yes, they're typically very similar, but each community has things that they may consider more important than others. For example, and how important is it what the community thinks in terms of the school system's final determination as to the boundary lines? Well, it's very important what the community thinks. Montgomery County has a very, I guess, long, rich tradition of community involvement in the boundary process especially. And so what the community thinks is highly valued and is considered in depth by the superintendent and by the board. Let's look a little bit at the options that are out there. Currently, there are 3 options on the table, but I understand that there are other options possible, but that, Marilyn, your group has to report back by the 29th of this month, a choice?
The way the process is working, that 3 options were developed by the county and presented to us the Thursday before Christmas. And all the PTAs have had meetings and different groups have met, civic associations have looked at them. And we're supposed to come back this Thursday and give Joe and Bruce feedback on those options, how they meet the criteria that we established. And then the following week there'll be a second round of options that will respond to that feedback. Then the following week there's a public meeting, and then we do our report the end of January. So there's basically 4 more meetings.
Well, before we look at these particular options, it strikes me that this is all moving very fast, that a lot of people are probably just now beginning to focus on this issue, even though lots of papers have gone home with kids letting them know about it. Why does this have to happen so quickly?
The main reason is we're going to be opening up a middle school this coming September, 1998. It wasn't until July that the final option for housing students on Wayne Avenue was adopted by the board, and it wasn't until September that approach was approved by the county council. So getting through that, and in the interim on November 11th, which Armistice Day I think is appropriate, the board adopted a revised policy on boundary studies to make them less divisive and more community friendly.
Okay, let's look at option number 1, if we might. You can see it on your screen now. Marilyn, tell us a little bit about what the thinking behind option number 1 is. We can see in the bottom of the screen that's largely the downtown of Takoma Park, the central area of Takoma Park, and everything. You can kind of position yourself.
Right, that straight line is New Hampshire Avenue. That goes
on the diagonal you're
Former
talking about
county
from the
line.
bottom of up to the right.
Right.
What were the basic thoughts that went into attempting to cluster based, you can see in the colors, the elementary schools that the districts that will feed the particular elementary schools. Each of these colors represents basically a different elementary school.
Well, I think part of the thinking behind this option was to put as much of unification into the Takoma Park schools, Takoma Park Elementary, and then feeding into Piney Branch as possible, while providing a neighborhood for the Wayne Avenue School, because there are several of the white areas that are right around the dot that, in number 17 that is the the old Blair High School. Also, the little white area up there is North Hills, and they would like to they would not like to keep coming all the way down to East Silver Spring, which is where they've been. Under this option, several schools are not disturbed at all, which I think was part of it. Forest Knolls and Montgomery Knolls Pinecrest stay the same, and Rolling Terrace stays the same. The upper part of unification is feeding into New Hampshire Estates and then up to Oakview. And
this is in the eastern part of
right,
the map.
yeah. And I'm not sure how that works because it's a sort of a long distance from the bottom of those little dots up to the top of those other little dots. So those children would have quite a trek. But this option had a lot of potential, we thought.
Okay, let's look at option number 2 and walk us through what the difference is between option 1 and 2 and who wins and who loses in this option.
Well, I don't think you can describe it in terms of winning and losing because there's all the schools that we have in our cluster are good, and we expect the new elementary school to be just as good. And it's also a very exciting opportunity to be involved in the creation of a new school. So I think for people who have thoughts about Wayne Avenue, that they should be reassured that it is going to be just as good as Takoma Park Elementary. But option 2, again, sends a lot of unification to Takoma Park, but it does put Section 33, which is part of Takoma Park that is on the northwest side of Piney Branch Road, back into Takoma Park. It does put some of unification into Rolling Terrace, and it does create a little island there on the edge of the map, which would go up to New Hampshire Estates. So again, you've got a group of kids that would have to go quite a distance on the bus. It changes the boundaries of Highland View, which is sort of in the middle of the map, by including 6, 7, 8, and 12 right around Highland View. Again, Forest Knolls and Pinecrest Montgomery Knolls remains unchanged. This, I don't know, Joe, why don't you tell us what the thinking is behind this option?
Well, it's just basically a different approach to populating the new elementary school and trying to minimize disruption in the other schools. It does add part of the unification area to Rolling Terrace. It does add part of the unification area to Takoma Park, Piney Branch. It does take Zone 33, which is the one zone that is part of, I guess, the city of Takoma Park, and moves it into East Silver Spring.
Among the various criteria that we talked about earlier that go into drawing boundaries, which of these criteria does option 2 most reflect? Does it emphasize any of them more so than others in comparison to option 1 and option 3, which we'll see in a minute?
I think that all of the options addressed diversity in almost the same way. The numbers of the ethnic groups and the socioeconomic groups, which are called farms for free and reduced lunches, did not change that much except for Oakview, which went up in any of these options. So this option, none of these really changed the demographics significantly. I think that, as Joe said, this was really an attempt to create a nice set for the Wayne Avenue School.
Mm-hmm. Let's look at option number 3.
Option number 3 was drawn, I think, purely geographically. This gives a very small neighborhood zone to the new Wayne Avenue School. It's really an area of about maybe 9 or 10 blocks, and it brings most of the population into Wayne Avenue from unification, which means that all those children would have to ride the bus across the cluster to that school. And I don't think it would be good for that school, because how would you get to PTA meetings? I mean, you'd have to come all the way across to go to a PTA meeting. This basically keeps ESS and Takoma, and it keeps all the other schools almost exactly the same. So this is just sort of the leapfrog option of putting unification at Wayne Avenue.
Right. This one is the least disruptive to the existing.
To everybody. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
More is at stake here than simply line drawing, obviously, and what it comes down to ultimately in some ways is not only where our kids are going to be enrolled in school, but who's going to be sitting next to them in school too. And of these options, it seems to me that what you're saying is it doesn't really matter which one is selected in terms of the demographic mix that is going to end up at these schools. Is that true?
I would say that's true.
There is some variation, but there is not wide disparity in any of the options. They try to come fairly close.
Okay, let's talk about the process from here then, because we're running short on time. We talked about the meeting after meeting after meeting, but a report after the recommendation of options is made to the county school board, then a decision is going to be taken in late March, as I understand it. Is that right?
Yes.
And is that the final decision?
Yes.
Yeah, because the school's opening in September. The middle school's opening its doors, so...
So what can a parent who's just focusing on this now do if they want to get involved in the process?
They could come to the boundary meetings, which are held at Blair High School at 7:30 on Thursday, and probably not participate, but certainly listen to what's going on and look at the literature. There are opportunities built into the process after the superintendent makes his recommendation, which is, I believe, the 17th of February, for individuals and community associations to contact the school board and make their views known. And there's also a public hearing where people can sign up to testify.
That's
so
great.
there's a lot of room for people to have input into this process.
Thanks so much for joining us in the coffee house. Marilyn Shoenfeld and Joe Lavorgna. We're about out of time now. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Coffee House Forum. Still to come, Liz Lerman of Liz Lerman's Dance Exchange, blues harpist Phil Wiggins, poetry by Alona Popper, and what Takoma is reading. But first, teaching school kids tolerance.
Piney Branch, our PTA started a very important conversation about discrimination against gay and lesbian people and why it might be critical to teach about anti-gay discrimination in elementary school. We showed a documentary called It's Elementary, talking about gay issues in school. And that film looks at what other schools around the country are doing on the issue. About 50 parents saw the film and it had a real impact. People began to realize the damage that results from the forced invisibility of gay people in schools, like the very high suicide rate among teenagers who identify as gay or lesbian. And when you consider that at a school like Piney Branch, where there are 600 students, somewhere between 30 or 60 of these kids will later identify as gay. We need to think about what kind of message we're sending these kids when no role models are here because of invisibility, or when they hear another kid hurl the insult faggot and no adult steps in to stop the name calling. We started a standing committee of the PTA last year called the Tolerance Advocacy Committee so we can continue to have this dialogue, and not just about gay and lesbian issues, but really about how we as a school community can grow stronger from the wonderful diversity that we have here, racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity. I really encourage those who are watching this to get involved in the dialogue in the coming year across the Montgomery County system.
Hi, and welcome to Body and Soul. Every town has its comings and goings, but not every arrival warrants the attention of the mayor and several city council members, not to mention a whole host of nimble-footed citizens. Like that word, nimble-footed. Such was the case, however, for Liz Lerman and the Dance Exchange when they moved to Takoma Park in December. A delegation headed by Mayor Kathy Porter welcomed them to town as part of a 4-hour dance-a-thon. The mayor even took off her shoes. Why all the fuss? Well, that's what we're going to find out, because we have with us in the studio Liz Lerman. Thank you for coming.
Thanks very much for having me.
You know, a whole bunch of people over the last year have kept saying to me, you've got to have Liz Lerman on the show. And I've said, you know, why? And they've always said, well, she's special. I guess by which they meant she's different. And having gone to your opening, I have my own opinion now about what that means. But let me put the question to you first. Let you answer it. What distinguishes you and your company from all those other dance companies out there?
Well, first of all, it's wonderful to be here, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to get to talk about it all.
My pleasure.
I think there are a lot of things on people's minds when they say, check out this particular company. The most obvious difference is who's in the company. People ranging in age from in their 20s into their 70s, and we intend to expand that even more as we settle into our new home. I think it's different because of what we dance about, the subject matter of the dances, the fact that often the dances have subject matter. I think it's different because of the way we respect individuals within a whole group. This notion, you know, one way I like to think about it these days is that people often, mistakenly, I think, set up the idea of sort of the rugged individual visionary artist versus the community, or alienated from the community, or separate from. And I just find that a bogus notion. And I can be as strong an individual, as strong an individual as I can be, and still acknowledge the community, and I think that's a big part of us.
I think you're right. Community is the secret word here, and actually that fits into what I came away with from the opening, because what struck me as very remarkable and impressed me was one of your instructors stood out there. We're going to see this on the screen here in just a minute, and snatched people off the floor out of the spectators section. In a matter of 10 or 15 minutes, we had gone from kids, and everybody from kids to 60-year-olds up on the floor, from sitting still to performing, actual performing. And we are actually going to see this because I was there with my video camera. Are we up on here? Here it comes. No, not quite yet. Okay. Anyway, you can tell us what's going on now. This is the beginning of it.
Oh, okay. This is, the person teaching is Andy Torres, who's an extraordinary artist, who I found when I was doing a ballet out in Ohio. He was teaching in their outreach program. This is a guy who has been on Broadway. He's done a million things with his life. He's teaching a West African welcoming dance and explaining a little bit about what the movements themselves mean.
He took
There he
everybody
is.
through
There he
this,
is.
through the stages and
And then eventually taught the words.
taught the words, and then
And,
eventually the music rolled up there. A little cameo
Yeah.
from the artistic director on the silent.
I'm talking to Charles, this wonderful young man we've been dancing with from the Takoma Park Education Center. Yeah, and that's Giselle out there. So what you see are some company members and then a whole host of people who showed up for this open house, which was really great.
So these are just people out of the audience.
It's true, but it's sprinkled in there. I have to say, like there's Sharon Chaitlin, one of the great dance therapists of all time. There's some other company. There are a lot of parents and these beautiful young people who are already have come into our doors and have been studying with us. So, yeah. It was wonderful to see, though. It was really fun. And then, of course, they turned at the open houses. Remember, then they turned and they did it one more time for everyone else who had just arrived. Right. So it was a very nice thing. Right. Yeah, and they're flying. The things in their hands are these. We had people that day write ways that they thought about home, ways that they thought about Takoma Park, good wishes for us, and they were very nice. Very nice. There's Martha Whitman, who is incredible. Yes.
So and of course, what I'd heard about the Liz Lerman Dance Exchange is that it does run from 6 to 60, and we didn't see there was a little baby at one point doing this. Well, let me ask you just historically here, how you got started yourself, and where you got started.
Well, I was really lucky because I don't understand what made me want to be a dancer, but I knew from the time I was 4. And my family, at the time, actually we lived in Washington briefly and then we moved back to the Midwest. My parents found me an amazing teacher, Ethel Butler, who just died in the last couple of years, who had danced with Graham. And so at the age of 5, I started taking...
This has been your life.
That's, yes, it has. It's incredible to me. Although I must say, I think because I kept pushing the boundaries of dance is one reason why I'm still doing it, and why I keep finding it such a fruitful and satisfying endeavor. Yeah. I think if I only danced the way I had been taught, and the way the world sort of mostly perceived dance, I doubt I would have been able to stay with it. But because, in my early years, it was just all technical training, for which I'm very grateful. It was wonderful training, but pushing it into new spheres.
Well, pushing the boundaries, one of the things you mentioned earlier when we were before the show, you have, is it Giselle, is that her name, is doing this performance about whether she's black enough?
Yes.
And that's the sort of performance that you're famous for, right? And talk about that a little bit.
What I would say is, first of all, that the company members are doing a concert of their own work. Just about every way the Dance Exchange operates sort of shines a fresh light on how we might organize our institutions, how we might expect art and artists or professionals to behave. Well, one of the old ideas is in arts organizations you have somebody like me on top and we're the great visionary, and it all sort of flows out of our heads magically, and everybody else, our little underlings, sort of do that. Well, I just don't experience it that way. The people who come to the Dance Exchange are incredible artists in their own right. The nature of our collaborations is one of constant, sometimes the flow is there, and sometimes there's a little bit of challenge, which is good. Once a year, the company members put on a concert of their own work, and I find it very compelling and wonderful to see, to watch their voices come out, to see where they're pushing themselves. And Giselle and I worked together in one of my works last year, examining some questions about history and race, being that that's a part of her history and a part of my history too. So we got started on some things, but it's stuff she'd been thinking about for a long time. So she's made a remarkable work that sort of questions the nature of what it means to be part of a group. In this case, is she black enough? I myself made a piece about a few years ago called The Good Jew, in which I was on trial for whether I was Jewish enough. And these questions are critical for each of our groups. She does it with humor, she does it with insight, she does it with incredible poignancy. It's amazing.
Yeah, and not to give Takoma Park too much credit, but this is obviously something that can be examined in Takoma Park as part of a natural outflow of the community, I guess.
Well, you know, I think that's going to be one of the really interesting challenges for the Dance Exchange. When we tour, we do a tremendous amount of cross-cultural work, or it's not always cross-cultural as in race and ethnicity. I mean, we did this project for 3 years in a shipyard where we were working with people who work in the shipyard, people who worked outside of the shipyard, and the town was very angry the shipyard is a toxic dump. So, and yet the 12 generations of people worked in the shipyard. So we were engaged in lots of ways that you have to cross boundaries. Well, Takoma Park is interesting because on the one hand, there's a sense of it as this and it is a remarkable community, progressive. I mean, as I've told people across the country, I'm the only dance company in a nuclear-free zone, if we still indeed are.
Yeah, it's,
you know,
I mean,
it's
it seems
incredible.
a natural match.
But it's also true that Takoma Park has pockets of isolation, bound people who don't cross certain lines,
Absolutely.
people who go to some schools and not other schools. And I think the whole way in which the Dance Exchange opens our doors and say, we want to be here for everyone in Takoma Park means that. That's harder to do than you think. Because even what you write down on a piece of paper and you put out and you say, this is what our school is going to be, some people will read that and say, hey, that's for me. And other people are going to read that and say, what in the world are they talking about? What, you know? So I think from a point of view of culture and class and race and what people think dance is, all those questions. So I'm giving myself a period of time. I'm not assuming we're going to solve all this tomorrow, but well, I hope people know that they are welcome.
If they want to get in touch with you, they want to participate, they want to join, want to sign up, there's a phone number that we're going to put up here on the screen, and it's 301-270-6700, right? They should.
That's right. They should definitely call. We will be. Our school opens January 20th. It's starting small, but eventually I hope will be a thriving institution meeting the recreational needs as well as the serious professional needs of people who may want to make dance, you know, their life.
I liked one of your ideas of incorporating sports, which of course is my great love, into dance. Show me what you were doing before with the pushing the basketball, making a dance
right. There's sort of
out of a basketball pass.
two stories that for me about this, but one is I'm constantly being.
We have to actually do this quickly because we're down to the last minute.
Okay, so my daughter's at basketball camp.
Right.
They're working on 150 girls in the gym. They're not going to give the girls 150 basketballs to practice, and I'm watching these kids sitting there while they're trying to explain to them that what you have to do is this, you know, is this. So, of course, now we do have to stand up.
No, we have to stand up.
Are we out of the camera? Okay, we'll do it like this. So you just have to, we could teach the dance this way, right? Now you're going to do it, right?
I'm just doing it as a coach, not as a dancer, though. But so this is what to expect from your Dance Exchange. Anything and everything, virtually. From basketball passes to.
I think people can expect to find dance have some meaning. I think people can find a way in which dance can, not just dance, art making, being part of a group of people, looking at all kinds of issues and things, and just having a good time as well.
Well, we are really out of time now, but welcome to town.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks.
And good night.
Coming up, the blues harp of Phil Wiggins, chasing away the holiday blues and confronting depression, and poetry by Ilona Popper.
Yeah. That was great. I'd like to welcome you to, and our viewers to musical tradition segment of Takoma Coffee House. This is Phil Wiggins.
Thank you.
The harmonica playing half, I don't want to say the better half of Cephus and Wiggins.
The better half,
yeah, but John might, does John get cable?
No, he has a satellite dish.
All right, well, that's the better half then.
All right.
So what was that tune you were playing?
Well, it's called Burn Your Bridges. It's like a kind of an instrumental that I made up sort of based on the Chicago style kind of jump tunes. You know, it's probably a lot of Little Walter in there.
Huh.
And,
How long ago did you write it?
Oh, probably about 1980 or so.
That's actually a good question. How long ago did you write it? Actually, I guess do you write it, or do you,
No.
you sort of memorize the phrases?
Just memorize them. Yeah.
Huh.
You know, I guess I went through a stage of learning how to play harmonica where, you know, Little Walter and Big Walter LPs just kind of lived on my stereo, and I just kind of, you know, absorbed a lot of their.
How old were you
stuff.
at that time?
Let's see, probably about 23 or so.
So you were past the point of your parents driving you out of the house.
Oh,
and
yeah,
putting
yeah.
down the.
Yeah.
So 23 really was when you started playing.
No.
Sort of seriously, or.
Well, it was when I reached a point where I was ready to start listening to other harp players and picking up licks, you know, because up to that point I had sort of, you know, learned on my own and developed my own style from jamming and from listening to, you know, other instruments other than the harmonica. Like I think I learned a lot from piano licks and horn licks and that kind of stuff. And
I sort of hear the harmonica in your mind, essentially, how that would fit in.
Yeah. And I was lucky that when I was young and when I was just starting out, I had a lot of good musicians around me that I could sit in with and jam with, and so I learned a lot that
How about another tune?
Okay.
What are you going to play?
I think I'll play an old one, Sitting on Top of the World. It's kind of a Delta style almost, a Chicago Delta. You know.
All right, take it away.
Okay. Switch these.
Yep. It was speaking to me.
All right.
It was speaking to me. How far back does that tune go?
Oh, it's a really old tune. I'm not sure who wrote it, you know, but I think it's one of the oldest. That one and "Key to the Highway," probably
Yeah.
a couple of the oldest tunes that I know. Yeah.
And were you playing in cross harp or straight harp?
Yeah, I was playing in cross harp there.
Okay. In briefly, what is the difference between straight and cross harp?
Okay. The reason they call the style the main style.
We're not talking about like gender preference, right?
Right.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Okay. But the reason they call it cross harp is because I'm cross keying the harmonica. Okay. Basically, the reason I do that is that it allows me to use mainly the draw notes on the harmonica in order to play the melody line. And the reason that's important is that the majority of the notes, like from about the first hole to about the seventh hole, in order to do what they call bending the notes, you have to draw them. And bending the notes is the way that you get blues out of this harmonica.
Right, where you sort of slur from one to the other.
Yeah. Whereas if I draw, like say on the two hole, I get, you know, with a relaxed face, I get one note, and if I contort my face as I'm drawing in, I can cause the pitch to slur down and get those blues phrases like. And that's the bend, and that's how I get that.
So that's and straight harp. It'd be like if the song's being played in the key of G,
and I'd use the G
it.
harmonica, right? And then if I had a set melody, I would use mainly the blow notes to play my melody line.
Okay. You're playing marine bands predominantly.
Yes.
Standard of the industry, so to speak.
Yes. Yeah.
Still your favorite after all these years.
True. We've had our ups and downs, but I stick with them because it's the softwood comb that they use that gives them a rich tone, and and the tone for me is the key thing. I mean, a lot of players prefer the plastic ones because they're tighter and you can get around quicker. But for me, the tone is like the main thing.
Okay. Why don't you take us out with one more tune?
Okay.
What's this one going to be?
I think I'll do like a little gospel medley. I'll maybe play a little bit of Amazing Grace and maybe do like a New Orleans funeral type thing where I'll go into Saints or something.
So those people that didn't make it to church, this is their chance right now.
There you go.
Thank you.
All right.
Coming up, depression and what to do about it. But first, Ilona Popper's memory, age 13.
What is it you want me to do? His little sister was in my class. He was driving with the top down, slowing down, pulling alongside me on my bike. His car so close I had to stop. He said, "Do you know the way to?" He held his penis in his hand, big and wiggling like a sick frog, purple, struggling as though he were strangling it to death. And he showed his teeth in a loopy grin. "Do you know the way?" Sloppy and lopsided, leaping in his lap as though to escape. My front tire slid out, dragging the bike down into the ditch. It was as if time itself had flagged and sagged against me. The hay stubble in the field next to us, the white houses on the other side, dust clouding up from the ditch, the red car idling. I bent my knees and reached the handlebars. The dust in the air settled over me, burned in the sweat in my palms, and I pulled the bike up under me and turned toward home, not looking back. I stood in the small space between the bed and the bookshelf. Mother kept her eyes on her hands, folding another faded towel. "Mom, what is it you want me to do? Call his mother!"
And welcome to In Sickness and in Health. There's plenty in this post-holiday season to make one glum. The anticlimax as festivities end, financial hangovers and tax forms arriving, and dark days and cold weather. But for some people, the emotional pain they suffer goes beyond seasonal blues and into full-blown depression. How do we recognize the signs of depression in ourselves and in others? And what sorts of treatments can bring help and relief to sufferers? Here today we have two experts to try and answer these questions. Dr. James Gormley, a clinical psychologist practicing in Montgomery County for over 20 years with an office in Silver Spring and linked to the Washington Adventist Hospital in Takoma Park. And Dr. Roxanne Dryden Edwards, adult and child psychiatrist with a private practice in Rockville and assistant professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins University. Welcome, both of you. Is this a particularly bad season for depression, January especially? Do we have higher numbers?
Well, from the family point of view, the experience of depression is often very common. People get together during the holiday times, and a lot of times they get disappointed that their hopes are not met, and they wind up maybe experiencing conflicts with family members. And so it's very common for people. Plus being cooped up and trapped inside a house, that's often another kind of factor that adds to a person's blue mood if they have depression to begin with.
And from a medical standpoint, just the decrease in the amount of time of light per day that we all receive lends to an increase in the amount of depression we see.
Now that's something that's only been pinpointed in recent years, SADS, is that not? Which stands for?
That means seasonal affective disorder, as it's commonly known, and it's different from being depressed because the holidays end. It's a bit different because that's kind of a clear identifiable stressor that can cause one to be depressed, or if you've suffered losses at that time of the year. SAD is more kind of, it develops on its own, where the person feels depressed at a certain time of the year, usually the winter, because of the decrease in the light.
What things apart from light can cause depression? Perhaps you'd like to start
Well,
with that.
there's many theories about depression. Nobody knows precisely what causes depression. Often we think about a biological vulnerability that maybe we know that depression runs in families, and with that triggers that, a death or perhaps a job loss, or perhaps even a positive change like a new child coming into your life. The combination then of the biological vulnerability along with the triggering event often can plummet a person into a very deep depression.
Now, it's something that perhaps many patients don't like to admit, or people who have depression won't become patients. They won't seek help from doctors. Why is this, and what can we do to overcome it?
Well, I think that's a really excellent point, and it's rather sad because it's so treatable. If a person who's treated for a major depression, if we're talking about that, has a 3 in 4 chance of getting better with the right treatment. So it's very sad that people are reticent to come in and get treatment, and a lot of it has to do with just the stigma. People interpret depression as weakness oftentimes instead of what it really is, which is an illness. I often tell patients that it's important to think of it just like you would diabetes or heart disease. You wouldn't blame yourself or think if I just were stronger and a better person, I won't have heart disease. That's the kind of mindset that I think it's important to come to when you think of depression. It's an illness.
And I think in the media portrayal of mental illnesses in general tends to create extremes, people that become homicidal or people that have very deviant, odd thinking. And the reality is that depression is, very commonplace, and it affects a lot of people that are very functional. Mike Wallace has depression and successfully been treated for. Dick Clark, Abraham Lincoln. So there's a stereotyping, though, that I think creates a certain added stigma and shame associated with, accepting the fact that you may have a depression that requires treatment.
Presumably it's much more common than people realize, because there are people who still refuse to go for treatment. About how many cases are there in the States?
Well, 10% of the United States population has had a depressive episode in their life. And if you think about that in terms of how many people that is, if we're talking about 250 million people in the United States, that's 25 million people. So
Large.
people who have depression are in good company, as Dr. Gormley said.
And we have increased precision as to how to diagnose these disorders. There's sad cases that I know of individuals who committed suicide 20, 30 years ago, perhaps because they had a depression that was unrelenting and there wasn't an effective treatment for it. Now we know so much more about the treatment, and we know pretty much how to diagnose it accurately so that we can get people quickly into the right kind of treatment and feeling better.
We have a list of symptoms that you provided for us for depression, and then alongside that we have how SADS differs from depression. I think we're going to get that list now, yeah. What kind of treatments can you give somebody who is depressed? And then also somebody who has SADS, they're perhaps a little different.
Well, what we found is that the combination, usually, again, if we're talking about major depression, the combination of talk therapy, better known as psychotherapy, and medication together usually work better than either one of them alone. So just throwing a pill at it isn't going to do it. And if a person has sunk low enough that it's become what we clinically depressed, that just talk therapy alone probably won't be what they need. It's the combination of the two. And the medications that we use are antidepressants, and the nice thing about the group of antidepressants we have now is that they're something that can treat almost everybody, can be helpful to everyone.
And there's more coming on the market all the time, right?
Certainly is.
Great strides.
And it really is important for the patient to feel that they're not in it alone. The doctor is there not only to try to help them understand that this is what they've got through the diagnostic phase, but they're battling that depression, they're allies. And that feeling of that you're not in it alone is such a powerful therapeutic feeling to begin with. And the patient should reasonably expect to feel better within 12 weeks. And if they don't, the typical standard in the professional community is to get a consultation, perhaps to adjust the medication or change the treatment in a way that might help. So people don't have to suffer for a long period of time, and they don't have to suffer alone.
Do they give up? Perhaps the treatment's not working initially, and
it's a common problem because people start to feel in their depression that maybe they're one of the unlucky few that can't get better. And hopelessness is a very significant experience of depression, and it's a common experience. And that's the time when the doctor needs to be even stronger to give that person that ray of help, hope that hey, look, we need to light that candle rather than curse the darkness.
And I think the other piece that adds to that, unfortunately, is for reasons that we can theorize about but don't clearly understand, the antidepressant medications often can take anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 to 8 weeks to really start to work. And so oftentimes people who are already vulnerable to feeling hopeless feel like, well, it's not going to work for me. So again, it's important for the doctor to point out that you got to hang in there and take the medicine every day and come to treatment and talk about it, and you will feel better.
And another thing that's been interesting about psychotherapy is, you know, there's many, many different psychotherapies, but the kind of therapy that's been very carefully studied and validated is what we call a cognitive therapy. And we found now that, that we don't need to probe into very deep, dark recesses of a person's mind. We can help people feel better rapidly by simply helping the patient pay attention more to their own self-talk. And we know with depressive individuals, they think negatively, what we call stinking thinking, in 3 areas. They think negatively about themselves. They tend to focus on the fact that they're failures rather than focusing in on their successes. They look at their day in a negative way. They think more about, you know, what's going poorly in their day rather than what they might have to look forward to or what's been rewarding. And they also look negatively about the future. We call that a cognitive triad, the future, themselves, and their day. And we can combat that negative thinking using cognitive therapy, and along with the medications, we can really create a pretty positive response to treatment a lot of the time.
Dr. Dryden-Edwards, you help a lot of children, and lots of people think of it as an adult disease to get depressed, but how can children get it, and what is the treatment very different for them?
That's an excellent question. I think, unfortunately, a lot of the reason that children don't get treated is because, for a couple of reasons. One, it looks different in children. Children are still unfolding and growing and developing, so they often don't present the same way that we adults classically think of as depression. For example, we're used to look, if someone looks sad, if they're frowning and looking down the mouth or crying, okay, that's pretty easy to recognize. But oftentimes with children, because they don't know how to put things into words, they put things into action. So oftentimes, instead of seeing a sad, what looks like a sad child, you'll see a child that's acting out, as we call it, irritable, not doing well in school, throwing temper tantrums, that sort of thing. So that's one big obstacle. It looks different. And then the other piece is that oftentimes parents, good parents blame themselves and think that if they just, did more things for their child, they'll just feel better. And then there's a double stigma, because not only does that mean their child is defective, but they're defective as parents. And again, if there's just one message that people can get from this, is that it's an illness and it's not to be ashamed of, then they can bring the child in and get the child treated.
We have a phone number that we're putting up, 1-800-THERAPIST, which is a directory of different therapists that people can use to get free advice on who to go and see. What can someone do if they suspect that somebody they love has got depression? Is it something that a person has to go and see a doctor themselves? It must be very difficult to force someone to go if they're not ready.
Yeah, I guess the thing that comes to mind for me is to talk about it. I mean, talk about it with the person, talk about it with their person's supports, and encourage the person to see someone. If it doesn't have to start with a doctor. If they're talking about it to someone, then the chance is greater that they'll get the help that they need. Whether it's clergy, their internist, their spouse, it's a start. It's better than suffering in silence.
And
and I think with parents of teens and children, talk to the kids about, we want you to just go there to get an evaluation and get checked up and see if there's anything we can do to help. Don't try to sell it as more than just simply a checkup visit, and then from there maybe the child will get more of a motivation to get the help they need.
Thank you. We've already run out of time. Thank you so much to Dr. Gormley and Dr. Dryden-Edwards for appearing on the show and bringing light to those for whom these winter days are particularly dark. Until next time, I'm Kathy Christensen for In Sickness and in Health.
That's it for the January edition. See you next month in the Takoma Coffee House.
Miss Muffet sat on her tuffet. Tuffet Muffet. She would have sat on anything, she was so wasted.